и меняет сам языки.
Леша, Леша, скажи Роме, что я и на английский сейчас переведу, чтобы учиться, потом на русский переведу, потому что сейчас я буду работать. Мгм.
Ага. Ну, то есть модератор.
Здравствуйте, уважаемые коллеги, и мы снова приветствуем вас в студии
Hello,
Profi.Travel
dear colleagues,
и
and
продолжаем
again
деловую
we
программу
greet you
онлайн-выставки
at
Online
our
Travel Mart.
studio of
И сегодня
Profi.Travel,
с
and
нами
we
на
continue the
связи
topic of online
эксперты
travel
из
marts. And today,
Берлина, Нью-Йорка и
online with us
Бангкока.
are the
И мы будем
experts from
говорить о том, как
Berlin, New
меняется
York,
туризм
and
в эпоху
Bangkok.
пандемии.
And we are going to discuss how tourism is changing during the pandemic era. I introduce our global experts today. Today with us, Medline List, the analyst of Focusrite, one of the leading research agencies over the world. Paul Pronkarn, the Director for Communications and External Affairs of PATA, and Sasha Now, the Head of Marketing in Northern, Eastern, Central and
Поделится с
Southern
вами
Europe
уникальными данными о
of
том, как изменился
Amadeus.
туризм
And
в эпоху
Nadezhda Ebel
пандемии.
will share with you her unique information how the travel mart will change in the future. We have discussed how the touristic market in general is changing, and not to make it that long, I give the floor to Madeline List, the research analyst of Focusrite. She is talking to us from New York. It's early morning with her, and we are very grateful to her joining us on air. And she will tell us about their scale research and on what is happening on European market and how the priorities of European travelers are changing.
Thank you so much. And hello and good morning from New York. So we all know that COVID has been a major disruption that's brought travel to a huge halt. It has led to border closures, canceled flights, new quarantine regulations, and all forms of barriers that have kept people from traveling. So with this situation going on, we wanted to know here at Focusrite how the new world and the new world of travel was going to affect the way that people approach traveling in the future. We conducted a study in order to have a better understanding of how people would be traveling within the coming months, about what types of travel they were most comfortable with, what types of travel they were avoiding in this new world, their attitudes towards planning trips in a post-COVID era. And then we also wanted to understand what they were fearful of, what they were most open to and ready to embrace. So my name is Madeline List. I'm based here in New York. And when we approached this study, we decided to survey 800 people from each of 5 key European markets. Those are the UK, Germany, France, Italy, and Spain. To qualify for this study, each respondent had to be planning on taking at least one leisure trip between the time we fielded in late July of 2020 and July of 2021. Each of these leisure trips had to consist of either paid overnight lodging or air travel or rail travel. So when we approached the big overarching attitudes that were guiding how people were acting, one of the things we found was that as much as COVID has affected people's impression of their own health, it's also led to a financial situation where they feel very protective over their own pockets and want to be careful about the way they spend money. It's known right now that people can plan very well, they can be very diligent, but things with COVID can go awry very quickly. Trips can be canceled or postponed. We also found that a third or more of people across markets were actually decreasing their budgets because of the economic hardships resulting from COVID. So they had this extra demand for booking travel options that were going to make them feel like they weren't too financially risky. So in order to serve that need to have some major financial stability, our travelers expressed overwhelmingly that they really want to be able to book travel that has flexible refund or rebooking options. If anything does go wrong, it gives them the power and the ability to reconfigure their trip without having too much of a financial burden on them. They do have in mind that other waves of COVID could come up. And so as well as they plan, they want to make sure that their provider is having their back with them, and their provider understands that some trips might be hard to take during COVID and that they need to offer flexible options in order for people to have the option to take that trip without the anxiety of worrying about how they could lose money if they do hit that book button. And This flexibility is something that's important to speak about earlier in the process. They don't want to see it only when they hit that book button. They want to know about it while they're still researching and comparing options. Now, planning timelines have been completely uprooted with everything that has been going on. We asked people about how much time they planned to leave to do both their researching and their booking when it comes to planning trips during COVID. And the biggest trend we really found was that things are changing. So more than half of people aren't planning travel with the same timeline that they used to before COVID happened. I want to speak about some of the main patterns that we see from this, but it's important to keep in mind that the biggest trend overall is that things aren't the same and that people want to reconfigure the way they're planning their trips, keeping in mind that circumstances are very different than the way they used to travel. So when it comes to researching their trips, the most common thing here that we see is that people are leaving more time to research before they decide to make bookings for their leisure trips. This gives them more time to understand which destination might be safest for them, which destination is going to be the most fun in a COVID era, and help find them a way to be really safe and to enjoy themselves and give themselves the best chance of being able to take that trip as they planned it without too much interruption. That's going to take a little extra time on the researching front to really hammer down where they want to be going and what they want to be doing there. But when it comes to booking is a little bit different. People tend to be booking closer to their date. There's so much that can change when it comes to COVID that they are a little nervous about book button before they feel really confident that they're going to be able to take that trip. So they're leaving a little more time in advance. We see that the French travelers here are a bit more spontaneous. They both leave less time to research and less time to book, but overall, people are booking a little closer to the date. Age differences do have an impact here. Usually we see that young people who are under 34 tend to be a bit more spontaneous in terms of booking closer to their intended trip date. And travelers who are 55 and older like to have things set in stone. They like to have their plans made. And so they'll book further in advance. We're seeing that COVID is kind of taking those timelines and shifting them around. The travelers under 34 who usually leave less time understand that it can be better to have a plan in place a little further in advance. They're shifting their booking window to book a bit further in advance if they're under 34. And those travelers who are over 55, who usually have everything set way before the trip, are leaving a bit more time before the trip to lock things down just in case things do change with COVID. But despite everything that's going on with the severe disruptions that are happening, that are causing huge issues with travel, the wanderlust is still there, and that thirst and that desire to travel is still there. When we looked into whether travel was still considered a core piece of their identity, we found that half or more of travelers were saying that despite everything that's happened with losing money, with having trips canceled, with living in this tumultuous health situation, they still consider that leisure travel is an important part of their lifestyle. And as we continue to speak and engage with travelers throughout this period, it's really healthy to keep in mind that that desire is still there. They still want to be out exploring. Travel is something that is a part of them, that they still love. They're just in a situation where it might not be as accessible, but the fire is not out, and this is something they really still want to be doing. But when it comes to decisions that they are going to make about how they are going to travel, their considerations are that health is really going to come first. And that's going to be a priority with how they are designing their trips and how they approach it. The top thing that people are concerned about when they're planning trips is just not getting COVID. That is something that they feel defensive about. They want to be advocates for their own personal health. We see up to 78% of people are planning trips in mind with the idea that COVID is something that they just don't want to get. We see at some lower rates that firstly, they don't want to spread corona to others. This is a concern to them, and they want to be responsible. And then we also see a trend pop up with travelers who are over 55, where they're concerned that if they become symptomatic in a new place that's unfamiliar to them at their destination, they might not have the medical care that they need and the right care that they would have access to at home. And this is another factor that they've been keeping in mind as they're planning and trying to figure out where they can go and how to safely enjoy themselves during their COVID leisure trips. But quarantines are also something that are very much weighing on their mind. We found that 55 to 65% of people were concerned about quarantines in planning their trips through July of 2021. Quarantines are just a big inhibitor in terms of moving freely. They take away some of that ease and the breeziness of leisure travel, and people want that, and they miss the ability to move about freely. This is a bigger deal when there are quarantines in the destination that stop them from moving about as they get there than the quarantines are if they're returning home and quarantined there. Now, at the end of the day, the goal is to get home. And there's no place like home. Travelers are really thinking about how they can arrive back safely, which is that core end piece of any leisure trip. Now, it seems like eons ago in March where we had these waves of flight cancellations, border closures, regulations that seem to be changing every day or every hour about how people could travel. But even though that was many months ago, this is still a really fresh idea for travelers that still haunts them. And they are concerned that they might not be able to return home smoothly when they're planning travel during COVID. And this is really going to have an effect, as we'll see later, on the types of destinations that they're choosing to go to right now. So at the time of fielding, travelers were already really warming up to the idea of leaving home, and they were preparing more and more for taking trips in the near future. So we saw that at the time that we fielded, up to 41% of people were already ready to go on a domestic trip. That's where they already felt most comfortable. Unfortunately, for international travel, this was lagging a bit, particularly for Italy and Spain. However, when we look at a broader view of how travel is expected to play out, not just at the time of fielding in July, but as the year goes on and as we scope outward to July of 2021, we see that the numbers pick up and many people are planning on going on different types of trips. We see up to about 9 in 10 of travelers who are going to go somewhere by next summer say that they plan on taking at least one domestic trip. And then we see some drop off in terms of the comfort levels of going abroad within Europe, and further drop off in terms of going abroad outside of Europe. Now, it's something that we want to call out in terms of the resistance to go abroad within Europe. These are markets where there is overland travel available, and it's relatively easy to drive to a different country internationally in a car, which is considered a safer form of transportation, and I'll speak about that later. But there's so much concern about how quickly things can change, how regulations or quarantines can change, that going abroad is a barrier. When it comes to going abroad, there are a couple groups who feel especially ready to leave their countries or to leave Europe. One of the big ones are the frequent travelers who took 3 or more leisure trips in the 2019 calendar year. They're a group of people who feel like they know the drill when it comes to traveling, and that they can really be prepared to go out there and are feeling more adventurous when it comes to picking destinations that are abroad or even outside of Europe. And the other major group are the travelers under 34, who have a different view towards COVID safety. They feel a little less at risk for catching it, or they feel like they might have fewer complications if they do catch it. But among the travelers who aren't yet ready to head out at the time of fielding in July, we looked at what's really going to get them moving again, and what's going to motivate them to travel. What cues are they looking for to know that they can go somewhere again? Well, one of the first things I want to point out here is that we conducted a similar study back in March, and there was one major idea that popped up then that has virtually disappeared now. In March, people were really looking for more hotels to open up, for more restaurants or bars to open up, and attractions and activities. They felt like they couldn't get a real feel for the destination if they traveled at the time. And we tested that again this time and found that people don't see this as an issue. They know that destinations are open. They know that they have opportunity to go to a place and really experience it more fully than they would have been able to in earlier months in 2020. So that's a great thing that we see, where travelers are clearly paying attention and they're open to going somewhere else. But the risk of getting COVID still weighs heavily on the people who weren't yet comfortable traveling. But the interesting thing that we see here is that the main goal that they're looking for isn't a vaccine. They just want to take precautions to make sure that they don't get sick. So we actually found that the decrease in infection rates at the destination was more powerful in terms of motivating people to travel again than actually having a vaccine become available. This doesn't mean that a vaccine won't be important. It's definitely going to be a big confidence booster. It can be something that makes people make additional types of decisions in their trips that used to be considered a little riskier in the COVID era. But for now, what we're seeing is that if a destination doesn't have a lot of COVID infections, that's a really important thing for them to put out and message to travelers, because travelers are paying attention to their personal risks. And then quarantine is another thing that does come up. It takes away that liberty of that freedom of mobility, which is something that travelers really want to see. So it's no surprise that quarantine is a major factor that would make them feel more comfortable taking leisure trips again if it were lifted. Here, we often see that the no mandatory quarantine when they arrive at their destination is considered more important than lifting the mandatory quarantine when they go home. But to return to their normal routine is something that's really important to them as well. So one of the things we saw is that there was a massive undertaking among providers to make all sorts of accommodations and precautions to keep travelers safe as COVID-19 became more of a threat and became something that was more constantly on the mind of travel consumers. Now, this was a massive undertaking that required consulting a lot of different health departments and understanding a lot about the virus. But we wanted to understand what was resonating with travelers, what they were seeing as most important, and what they might need help understanding when it comes to the new types of ways of traveling. With face coverings, this was something that they have really heard loud and clear. Travelers are understanding how critical masks are in order to travel right now. And it's gotten critical to the point where we see up to 78% of people consider them essential for other travelers to wear for a provider. And 79% consider face coverings essential for staff. It doesn't matter if somebody works at the travel provider, if somebody's just another passenger, they want to know that every single person there is doing their part in order to help. At the beginning of the pandemic, there was this additional emphasis on making sure surfaces were as clean as possible, constantly wiped down, constantly sanitized in order to prevent any surface transmissions of the virus. As time has gone on, experts have started to downplay the importance of sanitization and surface transmissions, but we found that this is still very, very important in the eyes of consumers and in the eyes of travelers as they look towards traveling in the COVID era. 57 to 78% of people said it was essential that there's heavy sanitization among commonly touched surfaces. When they pick a travel provider, it doesn't matter if it's transport, if it's lodging, if it's an activity, they definitely want to see that the provider is doing its part to help keep surfaces as clean as possible. Now, distancing is another issue that's been quite a hot topic. And the good thing here is that travelers have really absorbed well how important it is to be social distancing even while they're traveling. We found that 52 to 73% consider common area distancing or distancing in queues to be really essential when they're traveling. But then we looked at other factors that were related to distancing, like reduced capacity in a transport or an attraction or lodging, or something like timed entry for an attraction or an activity. And we found that fewer people saw these things as essential compared with the people who often ranked the common area or queue distancing essential. What this says to us is that, first of all, distancing is king. This word is really motivating. They understand really quickly how important it is to distance. And also, they might not be connecting their dots in terms of how something like reduced capacity could help with distancing. So that's something that needs to be pulled up because they're not seeing it as rate distancing in common areas. And finally, the other one we're seeing is that while face coverings are considered important and something like sanitizing surfaces or continuously washing hands and having everybody practice good hygiene is important as well. We also saw that 52 to 75% of travelers wanted to see that travel providers were handing out face coverings, were handing out things like hand sanitizer, and that these would be available to all other travelers and all other guests. Now, there are a couple of things that we learn when we see such high numbers of people who consider this essential. One of them is that good service is really never going to go out of style. It's important to always be helping them and allowing people to feel like their provider is there for them and going to provide them with amenities like face coverings. And then the other thing that we see that's really important is that travelers are looking for cues that their providers will be making sure that everybody's going to be following the rules, that nobody is going to get away without wearing a face mask on that plane because the provider has them, they can hand them out, and they're going to be enforcing it. It helps them feel safer, and it's really important for security right now for them to understand that travel providers are going to respect their own rules. So when it comes to the world of transport in the COVID era, there are three major ideas that are going to govern how travelers view transportation in this world. The first thing that we want to understand is that car travel is the new frontrunner. The second is that cars that are owned or borrowed from somebody that the traveler knows are preferred over rental cars. And then the third is that all shared modes of travel are losing appeal. It's important for people to understand who's going to be there, how they're able to distance from other passengers or avoid them, and they lose that feeling of control when they're on various forms of shared transportation. Now, for cars, we really saw that this was a clear front runner in terms of the transportation forms that have gained appeal since the onset of the pandemic. We see that about half or more of travelers say that cars that they owned or borrowed are now more appealing than they used to be before any of these COVID-19 events transpired. Now, rental cars have often increased in appeal, but there are different rules that apply to them. Travelers have that sense of stranger danger. They don't know who's been in the car. They don't know quite how it's been cleaned. So they're a little more hesitant about the idea of having a rental car than they would be for a car where they know where it came from. And then that sense of stranger danger is really compounded when it comes to shared forms of travel, where they have even less of a sense of who's going to be there and how they might be able to distance or avoid when they're taking that form of transportation. Now, we see that up to 50% of people have said that air travel has decreased in appeal for them since the COVID pandemic began. We also see that rail, coach, and ferry types of transportation where there's a little more option to move about have become less appealing. And this is because they really feel like they lack control compared to the other forms of transportation where they can get in the car and go and have more of a say in who's going to be there and who they're able to run into.
Медлайн, спасибо вам большое. У нас, к сожалению, ограничено время, но я думаю, что мы также свяжемся с вами.
Madeline, thank you very much. Unfortunately, our time is limited, and we will perhaps contact you on making an interview with you so that we could translate this precious data to the Russian market, because many people have gained a lot of precious information. Thank you very much for this huge work you have conducted, and I believe that the colleagues will use in their work further on, and we will continue together with you the work in order to spread this information. Thank you, Madeline. Thank you, Focusrite, that you have managed to present this unique data to the visitors of our OTM exhibition. And we continue, and we have Paul Runcorn, who is the Director of Communication and External Affairs, PATA, which is the largest, one of the largest touristic associations over the world, and all countries have different nuances, different situations, and Paul will tell us today what trends are topical on the markets of this region and which trends will perhaps stay with us forever. Paul, hello.
Hello. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. Thank you for everyone at Profi.Travel. As I was introduced, my name is Paul Brancan. I am the Director of Communications and External Affairs at the Pacific Asia Travel Association, and I will talk about Asia Pacific travel market trends that will stay with us forever in a post-COVID-19 world. First, let me just talk about what PATA is. PATA is a nonprofit membership association. We act as a catalyst for the responsible development of travel and tourism to, from, and within the Asia Pacific region. So we work with both the public sector and the private sector. Members are both governments, airlines, hoteliers, all the way down to small SMEs. We provide research, trainings, we organize events as well, but also one of the main things we do is advocate on behalf of our members. As I said, I was going to talk about Asia Pacific travel trends that will stay with us post COVID-19, but realistically, it's just one major trend I'm going to focus on. And Madeline touched on that a bit. It's about health and hygiene, or particularly safety. So this is based off of a recent report that we've just published just the other week, which can be found on our PATA Crisis Resource Center. The Crisis Resource Center is sort of a platform that we organized, which provides toolkits, research, insights into recovery and resilience, particularly as it relates to COVID-19. Now, this particular report was published in conjunction with the Global Health Security Index, TCI Research, TripAdvisor, and the World Economic Forum. The Global Health Security Index is a project of the Nuclear Threat Initiative and the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. So, most importantly, this report is primarily focused for destination managers, but I will focus on two particular parts of the report, part 1 and part 2. And realistically, it's focusing on the importance of a coordinated renewal of travel confidence in the health and safety of destination, or realistically, just in travel, in the start and recovery of travel. Now, as Madeline had said, safety is really important these days, but even before COVID, we saw that safety was an important factor for a lot of travelers. And this is most apparent. We look at this one particular incident that happened in 2018. This was an incident in July of 2018. A ferry carrying mostly Chinese tourists back to the resort island of Phuket sank. That killed about 47 passengers. This happened in this happened in July. Then in August, we saw an immediate dip of 12% of travelers from China. September brought about a 15% fewer Chinese tourists. October was the hardest hit with a decrease of about 20%. And that's compared to year over year to 2017. Over that 3 period, there was about $476 million US lost. So as you can see, safety, that particular incident showed that safety was a concern for Chinese travelers. So when we look at COVID-19 and what's happening now, and some of the data that we have, hygiene, safety is still an important issue. So the most important thing we have to look at now then is how travelers generally feel about the pandemic and travel and tourism. So there's three particular questions you need to ask yourself. How are travelers' behaviors and expectations changing, and by what degree? What are travelers looking at when selecting a destination? And will a new normal in consumer travel behavior emerge to perpetuity, or will there be a tipping point, such as the vaccine, after which consumer behavior will return to how it was pre-pandemic? So with domestic tourism opening up in many destinations, the travel planning habits of consumers all over the world are already providing early indications of what future travelers will expect of the destinations and attractions they will choose. So, on part one of our report, using data collected from July 2020 TripAdvisor Consumer Sentiment Tracking Survey, we were able to come up with these certain statistics. About the pandemic in general, 92.9% of consumers in Asia Pacific indicate they are concerned about the impact of COVID-19 on their lives, with 40.9% expressing extreme concern. Furthermore, 70% of consumers in the Asia Pacific shared that they expect impacts on their daily lives for at least the next 6 to 12 months. In light of this expectation for a prolonged lifestyle impact, consumers are similarly conservative in their expectations for the resumption of travel. 59.3% believe travel will be impacted for 6 to 12 months or longer and are unsure when it will return to normal, while 30.5% foresee impacts in the long term, with people traveling much less. So, what does that mean? So, for example, 68.2% of all those polled in the TripAdvisor survey expressed that traveling remained important to them, while 61.5% agreed that they were still thinking about traveling and where to go next. In fact, 61.3% of respondents mentioned that they expect to take a local trip in the next 6 months, and 54.2% plan to travel domestically in the same time frame. Finally, it's essential to note that only 14.6% said they plan to travel internationally in the next 6 months, with 62.6% anticipating it'll be more than a year before their next international trip. So, in terms of how they are planning their travel, health and hygiene criteria dominate how travelers are evaluating their future travel and tourism experiences. So if you look at the next criteria consumers are using to evaluate and book specific destinations, regardless of where they intend to travel, there's one explicit constant that they shared. Consumers want to go wherever they feel safe. In fact, many of the key factors consumers indicated that they are taking into account when selecting their destinations are indeed health-related. Thus, when selecting a destination, safety, as well as hygiene and cleanliness protocols are top priorities for travelers. This trend is also reflected in their decision-making process when choosing where to stay and eat. So, as you can see, consumers in Asia Pacific are reported that compared to trips taken before COVID-19, clear health and safety precautions are more important now than price, location, or exclusive offers when selecting a destination. So if you go deeper into this line of questioning, 91% of consumers indicated that cleanliness is the main criteria when choosing accommodation. 79% saying it's more important to public display compliance to government safety standards. Furthermore, when looking at specific precautions, travelers care about having hand sanitizers available for guests and staff, regulatory sanitizing in high traffic areas, and requiring face masks to be worn by staff and guests in public areas. Finally, safe distancing is also a priority, with 73.2% of travelers in Asia Pacific expressing that one of the main criteria they will use to select a destination will be the opportunity to avoid crowded places. Now, taking all this into account, TripAdvisor then launched a travel safe initiative at the end of June 2020 to allow businesses to promote their safety measures. This initiative, when they started, was adopted by more than 100,000 businesses and achieved results consistent with their findings. For example, at the time when we published a report, click rates through listings that shared their safety measures increased by 25%, while the recovery rate due to the new safety filter has tripled in covered locations compared to uncovered locations. Now, just outside of the report, Agoda just last week, launched their Agoda Hygiene Plus. And their chief operating officer saw that there was an increase in bookings. In their survey, they also confirmed that daily room disinfection followed by daily disinfection are the most important hygiene measures travelers are expected to be implemented by hotels and other accommodation providers. Other measures in the top 5 include providing hygiene standard listings, providing personal hygiene kits, and hygiene certification from the government. So as you can see, all this data shows that health and hygiene is extremely important. Safety is extremely important. And that's something that Madeline had said just previously, and this just emphasizes that. But the other thing I also want to look at also is part 2 of the report. At part 2 of the report, we looked at health and safety on local sentiment. And why is this important? Well, destination managers need to consider local sentiment towards travel towards travel and tourism in the context of health and hygiene, safety, and the environment, and for 3 particular reasons. How residents generally feel about their destination response and management of COVID-19, how do residents feel about travel and tourism before the pandemic, are they prepared and welcoming of tourists to return to their destination at this time or in the near future? If they aren't, what's at stake for the tourism industry? Now, you might ask why it's important, and I'll just go through that very quickly in just a couple of these slides here. So, the ranking of the most frequent tourism-related problems mentioned by residents reflects the importance of health and hygiene-related issues. So, for example, traffic, crowding, waste management is in residents' minds on a daily basis. Now, then, if you go back, then looking at shifting the focus back onto travelers, the number 1 prompter of a first-time visit to regional destinations, far more than marketing or other promotional activities, were experience of friends and relatives. So then you might ask, well, what does this have to do with my previous slide? Well, as it turns out, the hospitality of local communities is the most important factor contributing to visitor satisfaction, with safety, cleanliness, and convenience crowding all listed as additional key ingredients in shaping the visitor experience. Indeed, approximately 28% of global travel-related web social conversations and reviews about Asia-Pacific destinations and attractions analyzed in June and July refer to sanitary conditions, stressing the considerable influence on health and hygiene in the destination's experience. So what does this all mean? So what are the trends that are here to stay? So now they've been talking about the digital health passport. So recently there's been an announcement of a common pass that's been endorsed by several organizations, including PATA. It's something where you will have your health information shared. So when you travel, the destinations will have that health information. And then, of course, other providers will be able to have that information as well. Another thing is contactless solutions, payments specifically, or self-service technology. So you've heard about automation, self-service check-in at hotels, and the last is standard certification protocols. These are trends. Well, I'm not saying these particular things will remain post-COVID, but these particular trends are here to stay. We will see some kind of digital health passport shared or digital information shared, whether it's in a passport or in your current passport that might be added, contactless solutions, ways that destinations or travel agents or tour operators will use contactless solutions moving forward. Same thing with self-service technology, and you'll see more standard certification protocols. But what does this all mean? Is that the number one trend, while I talk about safety and security and health and hygiene, realistically, the number one trend is the duty of care of both travelers and local communities, right? As you saw after 9/11, you saw security measures that were implemented, and this stuck with us even to this day. It's the same thing that will happen with COVID-19, and if there's a vaccine or not, you'll see a lot of these things being implemented today that will continue forward for the industry, and for better or worse, it's something that we need to be aware of for all stakeholders, and all stakeholders need to be aware of how they need to adapt these particular things into their activities, into their daily routines, into their SOPs and standard operating procedures. That's it with my presentation. I think I'll leave some time for some questions and answers, I believe, with a moderator. But if you have any questions, you can contact me at paul@pada.org. Any information you want about PADA or about our report, you can just visit our website at www.pada.org. And with that, sorry, I've got to click forward on my slides here. There's the information. Sorry, there was my email address and our website. If you want more information, I said you can email me or check out our website. And with that, that is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for joining this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. I think this information will be saved by the market agents, tour operators, tour agencies as well. I think it was very useful. Thank you. We think that digitalization trend is the one that is been ongoing, the one that has been in the market, and now it was boosted. It's here to stay. And we think this situation contributed to it. And with it, we will come to this digitalized tourism quickly. We need these trends. We need to take them into account. Thank you again.
Thank you, Paul.
We are moving on. Now we know the trends of markets of Europe and Asia. Now, you will have a global view on all the changes in travel industry. By Amadeus Holding, Sasha now, head of corporate marketing in Amadeus, Northern, Eastern, Central, and Southern Europe. Sasha will tell you how the travel industry is recovering, and he also has interesting data about Russia.
Okay, good. So can you hear me? Okay, I think you can hear me. So thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Nadia, for inviting me again to be on stage and talking to your customers, the customers of Profi.Travel in Russia. Last time on stage, this time virtually. So hopefully next time again on stage. It's a pleasure today to talk about how to rethink travel as a transformational approach. And you will soon understand what I'm talking about. And I want to start my presentation by reminding us what travel was and what travel is for all of us. We all have this desire to know the world, go to somewhere else to relax, to be inspired. And until recently, this was self-evident for everyone, right? Travel was something we decided to do within a few hours, and we were able to do within a few hours. It was probably one of the expressions of freedom that everybody had. And maybe that's one of the reasons why the COVID-19 crisis hit us so hard from a traveler perspective. From an industry perspective, we all know that what initially started as a public health crisis became a global economic and social crisis. For the travel industry, it's no exaggeration to say that the impact has been devastating, a disaster. So let's have a quick look how the world is seen at the moment. And we see at the moment that the decrease in international flights year over year will be or is at the moment at minus 69%. The decrease in inner European flights is at minus 54%. And the IATA, which is always redoing its numbers on a, I think, weekly basis, they see that the worldwide full year air traffic projection is at minus 66%. So no doubt we are in a real bad crisis. The first one expecting that travel will have recovery timelines from 5 to 10 years. And the IATA is a little bit more optimistic forecasting. They expect that the travel will return to previous levels until 2024. And of course, we all hope we can do it much, much quicker. And actually, the topic of my presentation, of my speech to you is how we can achieve this. But there's one more thing we have to keep in mind. Apart from this being economic crisis for the travel industry, the situation today is much more complex. It's not just that people temporarily don't travel. We are confronted with complex circumstances that we had never seen before. First of all, travel restrictions are geared by national laws and governments. The question is no longer how well a country is able to attract tourists. The question is whether a country allows tourists to come in and under which conditions. Second, there are multiple travel rules and a lot of information out there. It's rather difficult to find reliable, relevant information. And I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about. If you have ever started to look for different destinations to see what is allowed coming from your country, coming from Russia to you, to Germany, what is allowed there and vice versa. And thirdly, there's a chaos of isolated solutions. Countries or regions or even single companies, they came up with safe travel or security labels that are not trackable anymore or comparable at all. So amidst this difficult situation, amidst this immense complexity. So the main question is, and the main challenge is, how can we recover as quickly as possible? Because despite the difficulties, our optimism shouldn't be unbroken. I think that is, in this situation, we have to believe in our ideas, we have to believe in the resilience of the travel industry. And so that's what I'm talking about today. And the question is, how can we use this situation for transformation? How can we better create travel out of this? And in today's context, better travel, of course, also means sustainable travel. Because never before the travel industry needed to adapt so quickly and needed to change so urgently. So the overarching question is, how can we not only survive, but thrive? What concrete steps need to be taken? What needs to happen now? And that's what I'm talking about today. So first of all, and there are a lot of important reasons, but that one is really the basis one. We need to regain the traveler trust. We know that people want to travel. We have seen it from Madeleine, we have seen it from Paul. They all have confirmed people like to travel. And it's as simple as that. If we don't restore traveler confidence, we cannot expect people to travel. right? And these days, there are many insecurities around travel. As you can see in these two newspaper articles here, which I just brought as an example, people don't understand the political rules. They don't know what awaits them in their destination, whether they will be able to move around there, but also if they are coming back, will they be able to move around back home, or do they need to go in quarantine? So that's really something which mixes up everything, and they don't know what to do. So we need to inform the travelers instead of confusing them. Information needs to be considered, consolidated. It needs to be reliable and of course needs to be accessible. Right now we have many individual information portals or governmental pages where the information is almost encrypted, right? But from a traveler perspective, what we would need is a user-friendly central information pool. So how can we give travelers the information they need? That's one of the big challenges. But when we talk about regaining traveler trust, we also need to have, or we also need to understand. We need to understand what has changed for the traveler in their perspective. What is it they expect? What is it what they experience, both in terms of processes, but also in terms of new products and services? This understanding is critical in order to offer the right solutions in the future, in order to let people travel again. And that's why we did a lot of surveys in the past, this year, and we continue to do a lot of surveys. We did a global survey with around 5,700 respondents and with a lot of respondents from Russia about the sentiments and the intentions to travel. And I like to present you this. I like to present you this in the format that I show you what is the global feedback and what is the Russian feedback from your travelers in Russia to see how to react to the different situations we are in. So for instance, and this is a very good sign, I would like to travel immediately once the travel restrictions are lifted. This is what more than 50% of the Russian people say, compared to the global ones with 37%. So this is a clear signal. People would like to travel, but, and I think was shown already from Paul, that they expect to have less budget for leisure travel. So globally, 70% think they have less budget, but in Russia, 40% think they have less budget to travel in the future. And Russian travelers want to go away. They don't want to travel domestically. They want to travel transcontinental. They want to travel international. And keep in mind, they want to travel 14 days or longer. More than 50% say, yes, I like to travel. I like to travel outside of Russia. I like to travel more than 40 days. So this is really an important figure for you as a travel agent to offer the right packages, to offer the right vacations. And globally, these are more or less the same figures. And this is very important if you think about what you can offer your customers. It's almost 90% of the Russian travelers want more control by creating customized trips. And this is really important because the key success is to differentiate. Travelers expect individualized trips. And this is globally seen at 70%. I look for individualized trips, but in Russia, it's 90%, almost 90%. I think that's a very clear sign how the package and the leisure industry must be set up in the future, right? And we saw some figures from I think it was Paul, or no, it was Madeleine saying that the car is the most one wanted. What we learned from the Russian travelers is that they are more comfortable with flying and they would like to continue with that. So 63% of the Russian people say, I like to fly. As soon as this disaster is over, I go in a plane and I like to fly and I'd like to continue to fly. I did it in the past and I like to do it in the future. Globally, it's just 23%. So I think this is a clear message. And it even goes more in that direction if it comes to the next results. Because I'm more comfortable with traveling by car or plane and would decrease or stop traveling by train. 50% of the Russian people say they don't want to go by train anymore, right? They would like to decrease it or even stop it. Compared to globally, it's just 24%. So clearly, yes, Russians like to travel. Russians like to travel outside of their own country. Russians like to go by plane, and they would like to stop and or not continue and decreasing going by train. I think that are important information we need to look for. And clearly, they are more comfortable in staying in a hotel or an Airbnb and would like to continue doing so. So 41% would like to do that instead of staying at families and friends or relatives. Globally, this is just 24%. So we need to look not on the global numbers. We need to see what the Russian travelers like to do, and they like to go to the hotel, right? And this is most important. Key decision driver for the travelers to buy a trip in these days is flexibility, right? 70%, more than 70% are looking for the same or more insurance coverage than before COVID-19. And the key driver for the travelers to buy a trip in these days is flexibility, rebooking and cancellation and medical assistance due to unforeseen circumstances. So more than 70% expect a solid insurance coverage for, first of all, medical assistance, second, cancellation and a refund, and for changing the date in case something happens, right? So important, you need to offer this service. Russian travelers partly expect travel agent support. They only 30% expect anything from their travel agent. But the majority, 70%, they expect prior to booking their service throughout all the phases. They expect that they can contact you. They expect that you give them advices and information. And 20% only expect if they request something. So travelers value service provided by you, by the tour operators or travel agents, is prior, during, and after the trip. And this will make the difference. And this is more or less the same for the global ones. So this had been the numbers what we have looking at. But there are more than just only understanding the travelers, understanding the needs of the travelers. We also need to talk about how to regain the traveler trust in leveraging and developing connected technologies. That's why we will continue doing market research here to understand, on the one hand, more what the travelers want, but also to understand what we need to do from a technology perspective. We have to leverage and develop connected technology. In fact, we have to do this more than ever and also more quickly than ever. But before I go in some examples of such technology, let's look in what areas technology will play in an important role. And this is, of course, the key areas is physical distancing and contact avoidance, like Paul just presented here. The travelers, they like to avoid crowded places. They like to have touchless processes. They like to see biometric solutions. And most important, and for sure the most complex one, is they like to have data and information orchestration from and for the traveler, which can be achieved through, for instance, a digital traveler ID. So let's deep dive a little bit into this. At the moment, especially airports are the pioneers of these technological solutions, and we just installed in Norway with the airport Avenue, we installed our solutions at 44 airports in Norway, and just let me explain it very, very quickly how this is done. So the check-in is done at a self-service kiosk, which operates not only with a QR code or a barcode on the smartphone, but also with a voice-enabled technology, so that no screens have to be touched. The bag labels are printed automatically, and the passenger can attach it to their luggage. The luggage is then deposited at the travelers themselves. Also, security is currently planned to be fully touchless, while boarding via smartphone is already the standard. And if you have flying through Frankfurt, for instance, you have seen all this already. And this will be installed in Norway as well on most of the airports. It's not only the airport that need touchless solutions and biometric solutions. And back in 2019, we did this test already at the Ljubljana airport in Slovenia. But it's most only airports in the COVID, but also hotels. They think about biometric check-in solutions. Biometric solutions for hotel will include identification in the lobby, for instance. You don't have to stop at the reception anymore. Automated transfer of data to the hotel property management system, up to triggering and sending the hotel invoices electronically. And lastly, biometrics will play a big role in the future for the access for activities and events at the destinations. So we have quite a lot of more ideas about that, but all this will be possible with a digital travel ID, right? The basic idea behind the digital travel idea is to eliminate the problem of repetitive ID and personal data checks along the entire travel journey. I think you know how often you need to show your passport when you are traveling. It's each and every corner somebody is asking you for your passport. And imagine this goes automatically. This goes via your Face ID. Our approach at Amadeus is to connect a digital traveler identity which can be set up in an app which contains traveler data, contact data, and can contain health data. And these touch points are, of course, machines like self-service check-in encounters, but also biometric solutions, airline and airport system, property management system, which I just showed to you. What's very important is that the traveler is in full of control of his data provision. So he's doing it this via an app. So the traveler really decides who receives the data, because of course this needs to be fully compliant with the data protection laws. So what we talk about here is the orchestration of data along the entire traveler journey. It could really help to make the travel seamless, frictionless, but also safe. As we talk about technology and connected technology, you can imagine this is nothing one single company can achieve. The whole situation we are actually in calls for more joint solutions, which brings me to the last point, is working together. So we have to work together in a new way, and we have to work together in a creative way. Simply put, in a trusting situation like this, there's absolutely no room anymore for silos or isolated solutions. The question now is, how can we open even more? How can we work together even more? Not just within the travel industry, but across public and all sectors as well. I believe this is also a huge opportunity, and there's a lot of good ahead. And we did this. We did this in Germany, in Spain, in France, and we also did it in Russia. We set up a meeting and we invited the travel industry providers, destination marketing, travel association, technology, the political people, the media providers, and we sit together and we plan together what each and every group can bring here and how this new collaboration network will be. So this is really very important to work together. And these are the big ideas behind Rethink Travel. So let me wrap up. We talked about what needs to happen, that we have to regain traveler trust, that we have to develop new technologies, and that we have to work together. And after all that, now we can summarize this by saying that these are three big ideas behind Rethink Travel. So we need to understand our customers, we need a kind of digital transformation, and we need a good collaboration from each other. Your future hasn't been written yet. No one has. Your future is whatever you make it. So make it a good one. This is from Back to the Future. Thank you very much.
Спасибо большое, Саша, за такую большую и очень подробную
Can't
работу.
hear you.
А сейчас мы еще более подробно поговорим о российских туристах. Вместе с нашим партнером, холдингом Mail.ru Group, мы провели
We are going to, with our holding, we have researched and talked to the travelers who went from Russia abroad. And Nadezhda Ebel, the leader of the analytical center of Profi.Travel, will speak, will tell you about the Russian outbound tourists. Yes, thank you, Alexei. Big data and the technologies allow us to get the information about travelers, which is difficult to get just by other methods. And we have found out what Russian travelers want and how it is included into the global context and what are the needs of the tourists in their tours. And we decided to approach this from another side and make a social and psychological portrait of our travelers. And now I'm going to share these data, which have been prepared together with Group. We have studied the travelers who went abroad in August and September when certain countries were accessible, and we compared this to the same period of the last year in order to understand what in the travelers' portrait has changed in this year. We will start from the general characteristics of Russian travelers abroad. In the beginning, we will check the social and demographic parameters, and we can see that in 2019 there were more women traveling abroad than in this year we have more men travelers. As to the age categories, and now we have a younger audience up to 34 years old, and from 35 and more, travelers have limited their trips. Also the marital status of tourists this time. In this year, we have more unmarried people who are traveling abroad. At that, those people who have even married ones, but those who have no kids, perhaps families have more concerns about these limitations. It's also well to notice the differences based on education. It is related to the age, but also a very curious trend. This time, more people without high education travel. And those people who are unemployed. And we have to study this, how it is related to the age or to those people who work less and are more free in their choice. It's also a hypothesis, but those people who were employed, they were concerned perhaps or interested more in preserving their job. Also, as to the income, we can see another interesting trend. I had a hypothesis that more people with higher level of income are traveling, but in 2020, the share of people with average income has grown. And we also wanted to see separately how the premium Russian tourists' characteristics have changed, because these people are traveling more. Many destinations are interested in this type of travelers. So we decided to see how they are changing. As in 2019, the share of men and women were sort of equal, then now there are more, and similar distribution by age. There are more younger people who traveled this year, and the share of older people has been cut. As to the marital status, you cannot find real changes, but as to families with children, premium type of tourists traveled more than in the last year. Among the premium type of travelers, there is a small difference related to their education, and also certain difference there is between those who are employed or unemployed, and perhaps people worked more on preserving their jobs, and we made rather broad coverage of all the people who went abroad in order to understand these trends, and they can be different based on the country, depending on the touristic product and types of travel, etc., etc. It's clear that Turkey, which was open, influenced the structure of the touristic flow this year. That is right. And now we will see the things which are difficult to identify with statistical methods, psychological parameters. Travelers are certainly emotional people, and among the travelers of premium tourists segment, there are more reserved people rather than emotional ones. It's also another interesting topic for discussion, and certainly there are no doubts that these people are open-minded and perhaps courageous ones, as Sasha now brought an example that Russian tourists are prepared to travel in spite of anything, and they're just waiting for opening borders to start traveling. Certainly, our travelers are very, very curious and open to new experiences. And it's interesting that this year, the self-control prevails in comparison with the last year. We can see the impulsiveness, more impulsiveness this year, and it was perhaps related to the opening of borders when people really were focused on their requirement to travel, their demand to travel. And it's not a news that extroverted people are traveling more. It's also interesting to see in detail how the travelers are distributed by innovative character, so to say. And there are more innovative people this year, and this factor
россиян
is
характерно. И
also
мы видим,
clearer
что
this
по
year
сравнению со средними показателями по
as compared to
россиянам,
the
по
average
обеспеченным россиянам, мы видим,
data
что в 2020 году
of
путешествовали
uh,
в 4
Russian
раза
people with good
больше
income. We
новаторов,
can see
чем вот в
that there are
среднем
4
есть.
times
Наверное,
more innovative people
ну,
who
это,
traveled.
можно сказать, неудивительно, но это
And it's
интересно
not
оцифровать этот
surprising,
показатель
but
и
it's
посмотреть его в
interesting
динамике.
to digitalize
Давайте
this
еще посмотрим подробнее на
factor and
сферы
see it
интереса туристов.
in dynamics.
Вот, например, мы
Let's
можем увидеть, как
watch
смотрят
the
телевизор,
interests
как много смотрят
areas of
телевизор.
the
Интересно,
travelers.
что
How many
на
people
самом деле туристы,
watch
которые
TV?
ездят за границу,
It's interesting that those
очень
people who
многие из
travel
них,
abroad,
больше
many of them,
40% смотрят телевизор
more than
много, действительно,
40%,
и
watch
особенно
TV a
много таких
lot,
туристов среди
and
тех,
there are
кто
many
ездил
tourists
за
among
рубеж в этом
those
году и
who
премиальных
went
туристов.
abroad this year and
А теперь вот можно
those who
посмотреть,
belong to the
как
premium
распределяются интересы
segment
по такому
of
свободному
tourists.
времяпрепровождению,
And
досугу.
now let's see how
Можно это
people
использовать,
spend
наверное, в
their
целях
leisure
маркетинга, в
time.
целях
And
создания
it
или
can be
обогащения туристического
used for
продукта, акцентов в
marketing,
туристическом
for
продукте. Мы видим,
development,
что, в
or
принципе,
making
вот эти
some
вот постоянные
accents in
интересы в плане
touristic
хобби,
product, the hobbies,
времяпрепровождения, да, они не так уж
spending
сильно изменились
time.
в этом году. В
These
принципе,
types
аудитория достаточно
um,
все равно
are not
консервативная, и
changed much this
вот
year.
заметно
The
только,
audience
наверное,
is rather
изменения в
conservative, and
музыкальных
perhaps you can
предпочтениях. Музыку стали
identify
слушать
only the
больше
changes in musical
туристы, которые,
um,
точнее, среди
preferences
туристов, которые ехали в этом
among
году
those
за
tourists
границу,
who
больше
travel
тех,
this
кто
time.
интересуется
This
музыкой.
year, there are more people who are
Вот
interested
давайте
in
посмотрим
music.
на новостные
This
интересы.
is perhaps the
Это,
only thing in this
это распределение
respect.
по всем
As
туристам,
to
которые
the
так или иначе
personal interest,
выезжали за границу в этом году и в целом, да,
this
не только
is
премиальные, а
the
вообще все туристы.
scheme of
Мы
all the
видим
tourists
снижение
who traveled
закономерное
abroad this
интереса
year.
к
We can
мероприятиям,
see the
к каким-то событиям.
decrease of the interest
Ну, в общем,
towards
это понятно,
some
да, из-за
events,
дистанцирования. Но также мы
some
видим
um,
заметное снижение
they
интереса
are
к новостям
preferring
о
distance,
политике, экономике,
social
какой-то
distancing.
социальной
Yeah,
повестке. Мы
but
видим, что люди устали, судя по
people,
всему,
and
от
we
этого,
can also see that
от этих
people are
новостей.
tired
Тогда как,
of
например,
the
о
political
новостях культуры,
news,
спорта,
social news,
автомобилей,
etc.
технологий
As to
не так сильно
the culture,
снизился этот
sport,
интерес. Эти же тренды
technologies,
заметны для
um, the interest
премиальных туристов.
towards those is still
Также
there,
снижение интереса
and
к
it is
событиям,
clear also
мероприятиям
among
и
the premium
социально-политической
segments of
повестке.
tourists. Uh,
Если
Actually,
сравнить
the
в
same. If
2020
we
году
compare the
интересы всех
2020
туристов и
personal
премиальных
interests of
туристов, мы
all
видим, что
the
в
travelers
целом
with
интерес
premium
к почти
segments
всем
of travelers,
направлениям у
we
премиальных
can
туристов
see
выше.
that
Вот, не
practically
знаю, связано ли это с более
the
активной жизненной
interest
позицией или
towards
еще с какими-то
all the
процессами.
segments
Например, вот культура
is
находится
higher
примерно
with
на
premium
одном уровне.
tourists, but hobby is approximately at the same
Также
level.
мы посмотрели интересы по
We also have
отдельным
checked the
категориям. Вот,
interests
например,
based
категория
on certain
здоровья. Мы видим,
categories, for
что,
instance,
как ни
health.
странно,
We
россиян
can
не так уж
see, strange
сильно
it may
интересует
seem, that
диета,
Russian
диетическое
people
питание,
are not that much interested in diet and
там, ЗОЖ,
healthy
да, здоровый
eating,
какой-то образ жизни, но при этом есть
healthy
интерес,
lifestyle,
все
perhaps,
равно
but
интерес
still
высокий к
there is an
здоровью в этом
interest,
году
high interest
все-таки
towards
вырос.
health,
Мы видим интерес к
and it
клиникам, мы
has
видим
grown this
интерес к
year. We can see the interest
медикаментам,
towards
каким-то
clinics,
препаратам. Возможно, это
medical
связано с
products and
профилактикой, возможно, это связано
preparations.
действительно с
Maybe
какой-то
it is related to
заболеваемостью тоже. Мы же все равно находимся в
prophylaxis,
пандемии. Но так
prevention,
или иначе, это не
because
самое
we are in a
все равно
situation of pandemic.
большие.
But nevertheless,
Но так или иначе, в целом, к
in
медицине
general,
не так вырос интерес,
the
как вот к
interest
клиникам и
towards
другим медицинским, ну,
medicine
каким-то отдельным
has not
медицинским препаратам, видимо. И
grown that much
это можно также использовать. Я думаю, что медицинский
um,
туризм
as
также
compared
находится на
to
пороге,
some
в том числе и
special
зарубежный медицинский туризм
medications.
находится на пороге
And
определенного роста.
medical tourism is
Потому что
still,
сама по себе
as we
ситуация
can
к этому
see,
действительно располагает,
on the
и поэтому
growth,
мы
and the
говорили о том,
situation
что как раз
provides
очень
that.
многие
Uh,
дестинации европейские, в
we
частности,
have
собираются
talked
развивать и
already
сильно
that
акцентировать на
many
российском рынке именно
European
медицинский туризм.
destinations
Также вот
are
можно
going
посмотреть
to develop
распределение
medical
интересов
tourism
в
and
сфере финансов.
plan to promote it on
Мы
the
видим,
Russian
ну, особенно у
market. As to the
людей с высоким
finances, we
достатком,
can
мы видим
see
интересы к
that
акциям,
people with
бирже.
high
При этом мы
income
видим очень
are
низкий
interested
интерес
in
к там, некоторым
shares in
вертикальным,
stock
например, да, и
exchange,
каким-то,
but
например, финансовым советам не
the
очень
decrease
высокий
of
интерес.
the interest
То есть
towards
это,
some
ну, это
micro
подтверждает вот
crediting,
те как раз
and it
показатели,
confirms the
что люди
data that people are more inclined towards the self-control and are more pragmatic. So this category of people, they are more pragmatic. And it's interesting that still there is an interest towards discounts, including the premium tourists. If we look at the interest towards real estate, we can see that there growth in interest towards countryside real estate, and perhaps it was a situational interest related to this distancing, the need to go out of the city, to sit somewhere through this pandemic. So the travelers do not really, in general, this category of tourists have not much interest towards rural traveling, but if we are speaking about sports here, you can see that the interest is rather stable. It was there in 2019, and it is perhaps for a long time there. This is one of the trends which will stay with us forever, and we will see these trends even strengthening themselves. Some activities like biking, especially among the premium tourists, the interest towards fishing, hunting. This type of leisure or this type of time spending is not that high, but as to sports, it is rather high. Here, you can see on this slide how the interests are distributed towards cinema of different types of movies, and we can have discussions here, but it shows as well that the travelers who prefer to go abroad, they are interested in not very tragic movies, not dramas, maybe an interest towards Indian movies or some movies for children. It's interesting to see and to follow this, and also a big interest towards horrors, which identifies the need in strong emotions, which are separated from real life, from real emotions. It's also interesting to look at this, and briefly, let's look at how the interests of travelers have changed in the touristic sphere. Here in this category, we can see a big interest towards traveling abroad. And it's interesting that a high index is with the city traveling and not the natural sites. We were thinking of the growing of the focus on nature, but nevertheless, the Russians, they want to travel, and they do not have much fear. You can certainly compare by regions, and there may be different ideas, but if you look at the travelers in general, then we can see these types of indices. It's also interesting that many people have considered their rests in the Russian south as compared to foreign traveling, but nevertheless they preferred outside traveling, outbound traveling. How the trips are organized, we can see a big interest towards hotels, and the colleagues who were speaking before me, they mentioned this already, that the interest towards train is decreased, we
перемещения на
also can
поездах.
see
Также
this,
и за границей, скорее всего, россияне
and
еще
also
не сильно
abroad,
распробовали этот
perhaps
туристический продукт. Возможно,
the
это
Russians
тоже такой
have
момент.
not yet
Еще интересный показатель. Мы видим
accepted
именно
this touristic
возросший
product,
очень сильный
and
интерес
we can
к
see the
готовым
growing
турам и
interest
работе
towards the ready
туристических
tours
агентств.
and the work of
В
the
ситуации, когда люди
tour
очень
agents.
мало, когда
In
много
the situation
неопределенности,
when there
скорее
are
всего, туристы
many
стремились все-таки
indefinite
получить более
elements,
квалифицированную
tourists
поддержку,
perhaps
больше
wanted to
информацию от
get more
профессионалов. Я думаю,
qualified
что это
support
такой
and
тоже
more
очень важный
information from
показатель для
professionals.
туристической
And we
индустрии.
believe that it's an
Нужно
important index
воспользоваться
for
этим моментом,
travel
как мне
industry.
кажется.
We have to
И я думаю,
use
что
this
туристы как раз сейчас во
moment.
многом ощутили
And the
ценность вот
travelers
этого
today,
профессионализма tuристической
right
индустрии.
now, have
Вот на этой
tasted, have felt
ноте,
the
которая
importance of
показывает
this
ценность, да, работы
professional
туристической индустрии, профессионалов в
information.
туризме, я
And on this
заканчиваю.
note,
Я думаю, что мы еще
speaking
больше
about the work
будем
of the
узнавать, интересоваться
travel
туристами. Теперь
professionals, I
такие
want to
технологии
stop.
позволяют
I
делать
think that we
интересные
will
исследования, и мы еще
do more
расскажем о
research
том,
and
что
tell
можно
you
узнать еще о туристах и
more
как они меняются.
what you can learn about the
Спасибо
travelers and
большое,
how they
Надя. Очень
change.
интересное
Thank you,
исследование. На
Nadezhda.
самом деле, если бы
It's
я
a
был
very
турагентом или
interesting
туроператором,
research.
конечно же, присмотрелся для того,
If
чтобы
I
можно
were
было,
a travel agent or a travel
учитывая
operator, I
современные
would
тенденции, и спозиционировать продукт, да, и его
also look
продвигать,
at
и в том
this
числе и создавать. Особенно меня, кстати,
carefully in
порадовало то,
order to
что
position
интерес
the travel
туроператоров и
products
турагентов
and
не
or
просто
develop
не
a travel
снизился,
product.
а начинает увеличиваться.
It's
Это, на самом деле,
very
очень хорошая
interesting
такая
that
новость
the
для всех
travel
наших слушателей, а
flow
мы,
is growing and not has
наверное,
just
видим у нас в
decreased,
эфирах
and
как
it's
раз
an interesting
B2B
trend.
аудиторию в первую очередь, да, это
And
турагенты,
here
туроператоры, которым эта
on
информация
our
может помочь.
there we
Поэтому,
have the
коллеги, я думаю,
B2B
что очень
audience,
полезно будет
and this is the
пересмотреть, да, и эти
information
слайды,
which
выступления Нади
may
и
help you.
наших остальных
And
спикеров,
I
и
believe that
подумать над
maybe
тем,
you will
как
need to watch
сейчас
this
и в будущем,
presentation
да, уже
again and see
подходить к
how
продуктам
now
с
and
какой-то
in the
такой новой
future
стороны, с
you
новым
can
взглядом.
approach your touristic product.
Я думаю, что мы
Um,
будем
and
заканчивать наш эфир. Я
I
хотел бы
believe that
поблагодарить Focus Light,
now
хотел бы
we
поблагодарить
will stop our broadcasting. I
Пату,
wanted to
ассоциацию, хотел бы
thank
поблагодарить
Focusrite,
компанию Amadeus и Надю
PATA,
Эбель, наш аналитический
Amadeus
центр, за такую большую
company,
проделанную работу.
and
Надя сегодня, мне кажется, сказала
Nadia
очень мало, что
Abel, who
готовилась
has
просто к
done a
выступлению.
lot of work
И
and
дальше,
slept
буквально через 25
very
минут у нас
little this
следующий
night.
эфир.
And
В
in
гостях у нас
25
главный
minutes, we
редактор
have the
Артема
next
Чумака,
year.
столица Ростуризм,
Тём
Роспотребнадзор, представитель
Чумак
агентств,
meets
кадрового сообщества
Rоспотребнадзор
для
and
обсуждения того, как будет
representatives
меняться
of
туристический рынок в
tour
России. Да,
operator
уже не какие-то глобальные исследования,
community,
наверное,
and
какая-то более
they
такая
will discuss
практическая
the
и очень полезная
changes
информация.
in the travel
Коллеги, спасибо
industry in
большое. В
Russia.
нашей
It will
студии
be
Артем
also a
Чумак
very
через
useful
25 минут.
information.
Удачи.
Thank you, dear viewers.